Redditors who went to school with a kid that later became a serial murderer. Were they creepy even back then, or were you surprised when you heard the news? I went to school with someone who murdered his wife. He was a class clown type. Would do anything to get people to laugh, read like him. He'd smoke and drink around our group, but I don't think he did outside of it. He was a follower, not a leader. His personality was malleable. I was shocked when they got together in high school. She was a real go-getter, 5-year plan, Disney-loving person, sweet and strong. I wasn't surprised they got married since she was the type of girl again with a 5-year plan, and also I imagined she didn't like living together without being married. Anyway, after 4 years IRC of marriage, he stabbed her to death in their home on a Sunday. Turns out he had been seeing hookers and had lied about getting his master's degree, which she and her family paid for. Edit. Everyone was shocked. He denied it, so he was not arrested for a little while. No one saw it coming, however. After her murder, the few people who spent time with him were convinced he did it. They mentioned shark eyes, not wanting to talk about her at all, reminiscing about times prior to their relationship. At the funeral, he looked like a creep. The investigation found overwhelming proof, and yet he still denies it in prison. He has a dating profile from jail. Those exist, and I swear to God it says, "No wife, no kids, not a problem." I went to school with a boy who shook his baby to death and then killed his girlfriend. He was always really weird, but he seemed harmless. I was honestly surprised. So he wasn't the violent type before? There was one kid in my class who was so quiet and shy, he didn't even answer questions by the teacher. But sometimes you'd hear him mutter about wanting to hurt someone. Everyone thought if one of us ever turned out to be a murderous psycho, it would be him. But he grew out of it, and got more outgoing and less creepy later. No, not violent at all. He was just sort of goofy. Like, he wore cowboy boots and would tell a lot of white lies. My family is rich, I met Michael Jackson, etc. He was friends with a friend of mine, and I honestly think that was his only friend. This incident happened maybe 2 years after graduating. I went to school with a guy who was fairly popular but was unsettling to me in a way I couldn't describe. He got arrested twice within the past couple of years. First time was for throwing a puppy out of a hotel window. It survived. After it wouldn't quit crying. The second time was for nearly choking his girlfriend to death and beating and biting her 2-year-old kid. They also survived and were able to get help. I eventually learned from other community members that his well-off and well-connected family had worked to cover up his violent tendencies so he wouldn't ruin their reputation. Apparently he liked to kill and torture animals as a teen. I went to high school with a kid who was pulled over for drunk driving and underage drinking. The police officer told him to get home and let him off with a warning. He went home and grabbed a hunting rifle and walked into the police station. The officer who let him off earlier walked out and was shot by the kid. The officer passed away on the flight to the hospital. The kid was 16 to 17 when he shot the officer and is still in prison 20 years later. The son of the officer who was shot lived a couple blocks away from me. Such a sad ordeal for both families. Back in elementary school, there was a kid in my class who had horrible temper management. If he was upset, he would suddenly scream and kick or punch things around him. Violent tendencies. He transferred to a school in the US in middle school, but I found him on Facebook couple years later. He seemed to have become less childish and had lots of friends at his new school. Fast forward to college. My friend showed me an article of a student at a university in California who attempted to murder his roommate. Lo and behold, it was the kid in my class. He apparently stabbed his roommate in his sleep, survived eventually, and then slit his own throat, also survived. His police mugshot shows a huge gash wrapping around his neck, all stitched up. Last I read of him, he went to prison. I lived next door to this kid who seemed completely normal. We played together all the time. His family was a bit religious and mine wasn't, but as a kid I didn't notice anything odd. We grew apart in high school. A few years after high school he met an older woman, late 30s when he was early 20s, and moved in with her and her 2 daughters, who were like 8 and 10. She came home from work and found that he'd stabbed them both to death and hung himself in the woods behind her home. Still fucks with me. I went to school with a boy who turned out to be planning a terrorist attack on the school. He was caught before he carried anything out, and was one of the youngest to be charged with terrorism. He was shy and quiet but very smart, got a full scholarship to Hopkins. He threw it all away, not only for him but for his brother that had been dreaming of working for the government. No way he will get a clearance now, with a convicted terrorist as a brother. Had a classmate who I knew through similar circles brutally murder a gentle-hearted soul from a neighboring town. Happened at our town's annual festival. Victim was playing in a band and went to sleep in his car after plenty of pints. Scumbag comes to rob his car not seeing the sleeping guy in the back seat. He wakes up a little bit after driving out of town. He proceeds to beat him from the front seat, then pull a rock from the side of the road and beat him with it. Once unconscious, he dragged him out and proceeded to run him over multiple times in order to make it look like a hit and run. I should make it clear that this POS was notoriously on a lot of drugs and had many convictions prior. He left him on the road and drove the stolen car to friend's house. His said friend called the police after he went to sleep, and the police arrived. They arrived, saw the car and POS asleep on couch covered in blood. He made a run for it while in custody twice, per policing. First, as he left friend's house, he darted from them up a field. Second, while in police station, asked for a smoke fresh air after confession, darted again and got about 400 mile down cross streets in a small town. He got life, but I wouldn't be surprised that he'll get out in 15 to 17 if he keeps his nose clean. But hey, race to wishing it's broken daily. I went to school with Susan Smith, who drowned her 2 kids in South Carolina. She was always normal, didn't seem like the type to do something like that. I went to school and hung around a girl that murdered her baby. To sum it up, she had a baby in high school. That kid was taken away around 8 months due to brain damage from abuse. She got pregnant after that, like she was a tiny girl and was clearly pregnant, and kept denying it. Her and her boyfriend had no intentions on raising this baby and planned to murder it. Baby was born, they stabbed it in the heart and burned the body. Her social workers noticed her huge bump was gone and called the cops. Cops found what was left, found a lot of search history on her laptop that made it clear she'd been planning the murder for months. It was shocking that it happened, but not super shocking. I mean, she did abuse her first child. Her and her boyfriend were drug users, and when we hung around in schools she'd show pictures of her baby, yet always seemed so disconnected when you'd ask her anything about the baby. Honestly, it's been like 10 years and no one knows why they killed this baby. She could have had an abortion for free but chose this instead. She ended up blaming her boyfriend for everything. He got max, she got 30 months and had since gotten out and had another son. There was this kid that would get bullied regularly in high school. He was silent, a bit weird, wouldn't really talk much even if you did try to converse with him. Then one day he snapped, stabbing his parents before school. Killing his father and stabbing his mother numerous times. Survived. She managed to call the police. They picked him up on the bus on his way to school and found on him a knife and list of all the people he was planning kill in school. He wasn't on the bus. His mom called police and they found him in his home. Still super creepy. He claimed mental illness as a defense and said he heard the voice of the devil. I was best friends with a girl who is in prison for killing her baby. She was a foster kid and that's how I knew her. My stepaunt was her foster mother. She would tell me about how her mom abused her physically and sexually growing up. Her mom also let men rape her for drug money. It bothered her, but she seemed to be well adjusted, and she always talked about wanting to have children. The doctor said her uterus was damages from being raped as a child, but she got pregnant. I lost contact with her when she got married and was pregnant, but I knew about it because my sister told me. I was really happy for her, and just knew she'd be a good mom. Boy, was I wrong. She had a daughter and apparently became very jealous of her. She hated it when people would focus their attention on her daughter and not her. Her husband decided that he was going to divorce her, and they separate. They had joint custody, so on a weekend that he was supposed to have the baby, she brought her to him. The baby was lethargic. Her eyes were shaking. He couldn't get the baby to respond to anything. Then she started having seizures. He rushed the baby to the hospital where she died. They did a scan on her brain and it was pretty much soup. The mom was angry about the separation and shook her. This girl was in child development class with me when our teacher was showing us what a baby's brain looks like after shaking baby syndrome. I had to leave the class because it was so horrific. She was sitting next to me when we saw it. I just couldn't believe. I couldn't sleep for weeks knowing that this person I once loved and considered an unofficial sister could do something like that. My stepaunt who fostered her and gave her a chance was hysterical. It was just all around awful. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.